I've been ranching full-time since 1992. I wanted to do it all my life, but I always had to work somewhere else. I worked at the perlite mines, and I had to, down here in Antonito, and I had to work there during night shifts and different shifts, and but
how old were you when you started working at the perlites?
I was probably about 21, 22. I always wanted to ranch full time, but had to work somewhere.
When you were 21 or 22, did you think about ranching full time at that time?
I did.
Trying to get into it, or?
At that time, not very heavily, but I was born in the biggest cattle ranchers in the Sandoval Valley, called the T-Bone Ranch, that my dad was a foreman of, and it just got in my blood. And I just enjoyed helping my dad and my brother.
So the T-Bone Ranch, where is that?
That's east of Antonito, about 10 miles east of Antonito. And at one time it was the biggest cattle ranchers in the valley. They ran about 1,000 head of cattle.
And who owned that ranch?
W.B. Hamilton from Wichita Falls, Texas. And my dad was very fortunate to be the foreman there for 25 years. And that's where we grew up, and we just loved it. They have horses, and then they had a summer range of 14,000 acres up in Vallecito, New Mexico. And that's where they would take the cattle in the summer. And we as little guys, we used to go stay up there for about 2 weeks with mom and dad and the whole family. And it was just the life, and streams all over, trout, and just very exciting. I couldn't hardly wait to get up in the mornings when I was a young kid. And we couldn't even reach up to saddle the horses or put the bridle on them, but we found ways to do it, but that was my love, horses, and
Did your dad have his own land when you were growing up?
He was actually leasing this place where we live now, and he ran a few cows of his own. I'm not sure how many, but there wasn't very many. But he was ranching on his own, yeah. They always had a little bit of land, but not major to where they could make a living out of it.
And when you turned 22, you start looking at the perlite mines. Was your thought to come back and ranch full time?
That is a good question, Dr. Wardell, because I had told everybody that I was going to work there about 5 years, get on my feet, and then buy a ranch. And I chuckle about that now because I was there 9 years and I was still not able to catch up, and that's when I started trying to get loans and all that.
When was the first time you tried to get a loan?
I believe it was about, I started on the perlite, I graduated from high school in 70 and I started in the perlite 71. It was in the middle of 70s somewhere. I'd hear stories, everybody that owned businesses in town were whites, and it seems like the teachers catered to the white kids, and like Mr. Armenta did in one of the interviews, we were punished if we spoke Spanish, so those things all took its toll on us, I think, somewhat. So I still speak Spanish with my brothers and my neighbors that are of Hispanic descent, we communicate in Spanish. Like I said, we went to school with the nuns, and they would kind of scold us or shake us a little bit, to speak in English. And at that point, I started noticing that, I thought that was wrong. I thought that was, something bad. So we never would speak it. There was a lot of Hispanic teachers, and or some, I should say, and most of the kids were Hispanic. So, even though there was unfair treatment, I also feel that we were able to survive and do our own thing, because we were not pushovers either, and we would do our own thing, and we wouldn't stay idle. The whites were always in the high positions, and that was the case at the perlite mines, and even though there was a lot of Hispanics working there, the whites were the ones with the ones that were foremans, and they too, they showed prejudice, and giving the Hispanics, the labor work and stuff like that, and and the whites on the machinery and being operators. Every time I'd come home, you know, I would help my brothers and my dad, and I just loved it, you know. And eventually I thought, you know, I want to do this. I want to own land on my own and cattle, you know, and eventually make a living out of ranching, because that was always my dream, you know. But I had never really pursued it big time.
And what were your initial thoughts? Did you want to buy land around here, or?
I wanted to buy it around here, and there was several places that I looked into it and asked if they were for sale, and they were. And at that time, I think my dad had given me one cow. You know, I had a cow, and I was pretty happy with one. And then my brother gave me another one, and so I started looking for land, and so I could buy, you know. And then when I found, I actually found like 4 places, big places, you know, and that's when I started trying to get loans at Farmers Home Administration. I went there with my dad the first time, and introduced me to the loan officer at that time, and you know, and my dad was very tough and very intelligent, and they respected him a lot. So that was a good feeling to go there with him, you know. But they didn't lend me any money, you know, but then after that I started going on my own, and my dad never went with me again. But even though the first experience was a nice experience to go there with my dad, because they were friendly with me, but I never did get the loan though. I did tell him, because with the initial interview that I had to buy land, the loan officer asked me how many acres I was trying to buy, and I told him it was like 200 acres at the time, I think. And I told him I wanted to buy about 50 head of cattle. And then he asked me, well, how are you going to cultivate your hay? I said, well, I want to buy machinery as well. He said, you know, that's getting into high dollars, and we don't feel that you have the experience. And I said, well, what do you mean I don't have the experience? I've been ranching all my life. I never owned any on my own, but I've helped Dad and my brother, and I know how to do everything. Well, he said, if we would probably be able to lend you some for the land, but not for machinery. And so I came home and I told my dad what happened. He said, that's okay. He said, to go back and you tell him that you're going to use my machinery. So that's what I did. I went back and told him that I was going to use my dad's machinery, so if I could get a loan for the land and cattle, that I would be set. Well, they told me they would let me know, and then eventually I got a letter that told me that I didn't qualify. You know, at the time I didn't feel too bad, because I really thought that's the way it was. I had a job, I had a good job, and I thought, you know, I'll just keep doing this a little at a time, and I'll start increasing my cattle, which I did. You know, pretty soon I had 10 head of cattle, and then eventually I thought, well, I need to go back, you know, and it's been some while, and now I can tell I do have more experience, and I do have more cattle, you know, and a little more equity, and that still didn't work. In the 80s sometime, because 2 of the loan officers were team ropers, and my brother and I were team ropers, so we got to be pretty good friends with the loan officers. And I went in there, and actually his name was Don Stearman. I went in there, and we had a nice visit about roping and this and that, and then I asked him if I could put a loan, and he said, I'm sorry, Gary, right now, he said, we're not taking any applications. He said, there's no money available right now. And again, I thought that's the way it was, you know, but so I came home and I started thinking, you know, and then the nights were killing me working at the perlite. I said, I don't want to do this the rest of my life, you know, and I thought they got to be lending money, you know, and I started talking to my white friends to the north, you know, and they were getting all kinds of loans, you know, and I thought, well, what's the deal, you know? I kept blaming myself. I don't have enough equity. I do not have enough cattle. I do not have a little ranch for equity. I don't have machinery, you know. I just kept pointing the finger at me that it was my fault that I wasn't getting a loan. And then I had some friends at the perlite. One sat on the board of the credit union, And he said, well, we'll lend you some money, you know. And so I went over there, and they did, you know, they lent me money. The only thing is the interest was really high. It was like 11% interest, and the most they would lend out was $15,000. So I started going that route. I had to work my butt off at, you know, 3 jobs, well, at the perlite, bucking bills on the side, and then when I'd sell the calves, I'd barely make the payments because the interest was so high, you know. But I never failed. I always made the payments, and so I didn't go to the FHA for a long, long time, you know. I just, when I pay that loan off at the credit union, I'd borrow more, another $15,000, and I'd buy a little more cattle, you know, and that's how I started increasing my herd.
What were the interest rates on the loans you could have gotten from the FHA?
At that time, I believe they were like 3 and 4%. And, you know, and that's doable. When you have that kind of interest rate, you know, you can have some flexibility there. You know, at 11%, you can't have any death loss on your calves. You can have bad crops. You can't. You got to work overtime. You just had to overcompensate to stay on top. At the banks or at the credit union, if you didn't make your payments, they would foreclose on you. It kind of took it slow on my marriage because I was spreading myself too thin. I was, you know, working at the perlite and bucking bales on the side, and then ranching, and so I was hardly ever home, you know. And I think for the longest time we probably wouldn't have done anything about it, but we'd start visiting at the coffee shop or at work, you know. I went and I tried to get a loan, and they didn't give me a loan, and they said, well, I went too, you know, and they didn't give me a loan either. And then some of the white guys said, well, I got a loan, you know, and I bought a permit. I bought 1,000 acres in Los Brazos, New Mexico, you know, and you guys need to go back. So we'd go back, and there was no money available again. And I always thought, you know, I'm coming in too late. The money's depleted by the time I show up. And when we'd see people trailing their cattle to the high country, or we happen to be up in the country, you know, the whites would come in with their big herds, you know, that you knew that they were getting loans, you knew that they were prospering, you know, they were getting set for life, you know, with a good amount of land and animals. Right now, I only have 180 acres, and I'm blessed to have those, you know, but I did it from hard work with, you know, doing it by other means. But sometimes I think of putting 10 head of cattle on the place, and you know, with 10 cattle, I won't make that much money. I make more leasing the property and cutting the hay and stuff. But if I had 100 head of cattle, you know, then I could. 10 cows are going to take up my time just almost as much as 100 head, you know. But I'll make more money with 100 head. And I learned that too from my dad. You know, one time he told me, he said, buy you 75 head of cattle, and then you don't have to work for anybody. And when I had the cattle, it was true. You know, I used to sell 7 to 8 calves, or 10 sometimes, you know, because I had a little herd, you know, and towards the 1992 and 3s, you know, and I was selling from 70 to 80 calves, you know, and so it was a lot more money. Some of the lands that were available to buy at that time, they were owned from Hispanics, and they were that they had bought way back in the 1800s, probably, you know, and the family, it was still in the family's name. They're for the buying, if you wanted to, if you could get a loan, you know, but again, you couldn't get a loan, but you know, and Dad, when he was leased this place, you know, eventually was able to buy it. So some of those places were already kind of available to us, you know, and in this area anyway, you know, if you went north to Manassas and those places, oh man, they wouldn't hear of a Hispanic owning any land over there.
When did you start getting together with other ranchers and farmers and start putting together the pieces of the puzzle in a way that, you know, working with lawyers and working with representatives?
Well, I'm not sure who started it here in the valley. I think it was Mr. Alfonso Aveta, you know, because he Like I said earlier, you know, we didn't know everybody was being discriminated against and not getting any loans, but individuals were already fighting them without our knowledge, you know, and then at that time when we started finding out that it was happening to everybody, we started kind of banding, you know, together, and then Alfonso said, you know, that they had pursued this further, and there was some attorneys that had looked into it, and they wanted to take our case, and if we wanted to join, we said absolutely yes, you know, and that's when we joined. I think it was like 2000 or 1999, somewhere in there. It was very complicated. You know, still today I don't understand it 100%, but you had to have a lot of documentation to go for the $250,000, like that you had to have complained to, say, civil rights or someone at some point, and you had to have documentation of that. I had none. I didn't even have documentation when I went for the loans, you know, so much less. You know, my dad had documentation years ago, but it got lost or it got thrown out probably at the Farm Service Agency, you know, so very few qualified for that, like Mr. Alfonso Veta. He kept records, he kept notes, he kept on top of that. And he was able to go for the $250,000 where we weren't able to because of lack of documentation. I knew Richard Gomez well. He went to school here, and when I was younger, I didn't know him that well, but I knew who he was, you know, and I remember the times that I did go to the FHA office, you know, and he was there, but he didn't work on farm loans. He worked on the housing part, and he would always tell me, you know, don't give up, don't give up. He would tell me, don't give up. But we never sat down and discussed, you know, they're not lending you money because you're Hispanic, you know. He would just tell us, don't give up, you know.
And when you guys started under the Garcia lawsuit, under the Garcia versus Vilsack case, would you talk with him?
At that point, yes. He had retired, and then he volunteered his knowledge of what was going on there, and he joined forces with us. And matter of fact, he rode with us to Las Cruces one time with my brother Donald and I, and attended a lot of our meetings.
Do you think his inside knowledge and documentation made a difference in the valley?
I definitely say that he did, yes. He well, you know, 40 years I think that he served there, and he kept diaries, he kept records, and I think that that alerted a lot of the high officials, you know, in the FHA that you know, that helped with this, finding out that there was a lot of discrimination going on when they did you know, looked into investigating all that. I think his notes were there and everything, and most definitely he had a lot to do with it. When I had cattle, and my grandson Isaiah and Donovan were very little, you know, and they would help me feed cows and everything, you know, and they loved it, but they were 5-6 years old, you know, and then I had to sell them because of the drought of 2002. But I never really taught him that kind of lifestyle, you know, other than the ranch, the tractors, you know, and plowing and stuff like that, and loading hay for our customers. But the overall everyday way of ranching, I haven't been able to teach him that, you know. And I got water rights. We got 3 good water rights on the land, and they don't know what the water rights are, or the name of the ditches, or the number of the priority. And I sometimes get frustrated because they don't want to learn that. And I think sometimes, well, why do they want to learn it if they don't work it, or they're not involved with it, you know, if it's not in their heart to do this, you know? Even though they still should know it, because someday something happens to me or I'm gone, that they should know about those things, you know? But it's so much nicer when you're involved with it and you're working with it, and you're, you know, like I get up in the morning, I go check the head gate, and I know where to go clean it, that it might get plugged up, or I know where a cow's about to have a calf and I go check on her, or I know where a tree might have fallen on the fence and I need to go fix it, and I know when the meadow needs to be harrowed, or ditches need to be pulled, you know, just different things that you have, and it's like you going to work and you knowing your agenda and what you need to do, and you look forward to that, and it's challenging and it's exciting, you know, but when you're just doing it in spurts and jump, you just don't have your whole heart in it. I think they have given up, and I say that with sadness, because like I mentioned earlier, you know, there's only like 4 Hispanic families that are engaged in farming and ranching, and one of my real good friends that lives up the road from me, he's about the same age of my grandson Isaiah, and they're very good friends. Amos Abeta, he's farming and he's very young, but his grandfather went in with him, and Alfonso, the one that spearheaded this lawsuit here in the valley, you know, he went in there and he knows what he's doing, and he knows what happened. My health isn't there anymore, you know, with aches and pains that I have, you know, I can't do it anymore. And even more sad that I see is when I'm getting closer to retiring and that I can't do it anymore, I'm probably going to lease it to those guys from the north, because they're the ones that are capitalizing on ranching and doing stuff. And I don't know of any Hispanic that I would that would be interested in taking it over, or that I knew that would want to, that their heart would really be into it to really make a go out of it. I might be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong.